Today, I want to talk about authorization express and using Auth0. So the catch is I work for Auth0. I'm a developer advocate engineer there. I started in March of this year, right when COVID was declared a pandemic. So it's been an exciting year for all of us and for me now at this new job. And I worked with Okta before in the past. I don't know how familiar everyone is with Auth0. If you've used Ping or Okta or Cognito from AWS, all around the same thing. It's an identity service to work with. It does multi-factor authentication, authorization, all that jazz. I'm an Exit.io instructor and personal websites, tylerclark.dev. And I'm on Node.js. So if you have any questions, reach out to me there and I will try my best to answer those. So today I didn't want to get too deep into authorization and authentication because it is such a complex subject and we're all coming from different backgrounds of what that is and how to use that in applications. So today I just wanted to kind of give high level overview of authorization versus authentication. And then I'm actually going to try to live code a little bit, setting up using Auth0 in an Express app and React, see if we can get it working in the browser here. And then if time permitting, I'll kind of show you how to do an RBAC example, which is a role-based access control. So only authorizing certain resources depending on someone's role, if they're an admin or a developer or a user and that kind of stuff. So first of all, this is something that was new to me. If you're new to the identity space or you're not too familiar, there's a big difference between authentication and authorization. Those two kind of go hand in hand with each other, but they are two different subjects. So authentication is the process of figuring out who a user is by using some type of factor, whether that be username and password, a biometric, retina scan, fingerprint, but authentication is figuring out a user is who they say they are. And then authorization is kind of the next part. Once we figure out who a user is, where authorization is figuring out what that user has access to. So this is the part that we're talking about today, and setting up authorization within Express to validate if a user can hit a certain endpoint and retrieve certain resources. And you can't talk about authentication or authorization without at least mentioning access tokens. So access token is kind of the middleman that makes authentication and authorization work. It's how, just as it says in the name, how we say what a person has, who they are and what claims and permissions they have access to. It's token based, and as it says, it allows an application to access an API. Application receives an access token after a user successfully authenticates and authorizes access. So whenever you're working with third-party apps and you use like Google, they ask you if this application can read your emails, your calendar. Those are all being compiled into an access token that's then being transferred to your application. So that application can now work with your information and your data, and all that's being passed between an access token. There are two different types of access tokens, opaque and JOTs. JOT is JSON Web Token. An opaque token is not as common from what I've seen, but it works in a proprietary format. So whatever application is issuing that token, the recipient needs to actually validate that token on the server of who actually provided it. Well, on the flip side, JSON Web Tokens or JOTs, they all conform to a specific standard. They're obviously JSON type format, where each property is a claim and there's a similar standard. Contrary to the opaque token, they're self-contained. So there's no need to call the server to validate. As long as you have the public key, you can check to see if this access token is valid or not. So access tokens that are in JOT token format, they are created with a private key, and then anyone can check them with the public key to see if they're legit or not. And the JOTs you can, and we're going to see an example, but there's ways of decoding and encoding the tokens, you can kind of see what's on those JOTs. You can kind of see what information is being passed between applications. So let's look at the code and see what just see what we're working with. So the front end, I've already set up just a create React app, and I'll put the links to this code in the chat when we're done here. And I'm also not doing the authentication part. You'll see that I've already got that set up. Today we're focusing on the express authorization part. So I've already got the authentication part set up, and that's using the Auth0 React SDK. So this is what it looks like. Let me zoom in here. Just a basic web page running a localhost. I have a login button, which is using the React SDK, the Auth0 React SDK. When I click login, I'm able to log in. And now on my app, I'm successfully authenticated. So I've already in the past created a user, given permissions to do stuff with my user, but I've now authenticated. So I do have an access token, which we'll see because we'll need to pass it along to our Express server. What we're going to be working with as far as code-wise, I've got these two buttons here. I want to hit this button and then ping a public endpoint. So this is going to be no authentication or authorization of any kind. It's open to the world, and I want to return something. And then I want to ping a protected endpoint. This one's going to be protected, obviously, and it's going to make sure that it's carrying a access token on the request, and that access token is legit. Cool. Before we get into the code, though, there is a little bit of setup required in the Auth0 dashboard that you need to do. So obviously you need an Auth0 account to set up the authentication part. And then let's look and see what you need to do for the authorization part. So once you created an Auth0 account, this is kind of like the dashboard you land on, the splash screen here. There's an applications tab on the left. To create the authentication part, which I've already done, you'll have to go to applications and create a new application. The one I'm using, I believe, is this one here. It's just a single page app, which is working on the authentication part. Don't need to worry too much about that, but just if you're curious. To work with the authorization part, there's an API tab here. So we'll click on API and then create new API. Here we can give this a name. I've already called it quick starts. We need to give it an identifier. So this is basically a URL. Basically, it's going to identify this API and separate it from your other APIs you'll create. It's recommended to use a URL. I've already created one, and the identifier that I use is just quick starts/API. So you'll see this in the code once we get to that. This is how we refer to the API that I've created inside the Auth0 dashboard. And that's actually it for just basic authorization. For RBAC, for role-based, there's a little bit more we need to do as far as working with specific permissions and some specific settings like enabling RBAC and adding permissions to an access token, but we'll get to that stuff. But all you need to worry about doing if you're interested in just protecting endpoints and not caring about specific permissions, you just want to make sure that people are signed in to access resources. All you need to do is just create that new API, and that's it. So create a new API. Don't worry about settings or permissions just yet. So with that, let's get into the Express code and see what that looks like, because we need to set up the public versus protected endpoints. So this is what I have so far. Right now, we just have a public endpoint. So I'm going to make another endpoint. We'll just call this one protected. Cool. So now both of these are obviously public, right? There's no middleware on them. They're not doing any kind of checking. So if I was to hit either one of them with a simple fetch, JavaScript fetch, this is going to work. Now to make it protected, we're going to create a middleware that's going to run the request through, grab the access token on the request, validate it, and if it's actually legit, then we'll respond with this message. If not, we're going to throw an error. So in order to do that, there are two npm packages that we'll need to install. Now, both of these come from Auth0. There are npm packages to use with Express. It's express-jot. And let me throw this in the Zoom chat too. You don't need to worry too much about the I just realized you're running your slides as your own server. Yep. Good. Thankfully for the multiple ports, I'm not clashing with any of them right now. So this is the first one, express.jot. So basically, this is going to validate that the jot that's coming through from the client is in the correct jot format. Because remember my slide, all jots kind of form to a standard. So this one's checking the standard in which the jot is created. The second one checks the public key that goes to my Auth0 account to make sure that the access token that it's working with was created correctly using the private key, which no one knows about other than myself and Auth0, and make sure that it's a legit access token. So those two will need to create a middleware. So we'll go back to this code, and I won't bore you with watching me type. So the first thing we'll need to do, obviously, is bring in those two packages. So we have that express.jot npm package, which is, again, checking the format of the jot. And then this one is checking the public key that I'll provide to it to make sure that it matches with the private key creation of my access token. Second thing is creating our middleware. So I'm going to call this authorized access token. You see I'm checking the format of the jot here using one of the packages so far. And then the secret part of this jot, I'm passing through a bunch of config options that don't necessarily need to understand each of them. This is kind of like the basic implementation of it. But here I'm going to be passing through a location of my public key, and the token, this JOX RSA, is going to go to that URL, grab the public key, and then validate the access token. You can customize it depending on what algorithm was used to create the private key. In my case, the default was RS256. And then that's pretty much it. So if you want to look more into kind of what rate limit and caching means, feel free. But for a basic example, you don't really need to get into all of that. This is going to do more than enough to validate the access token that comes across. So once we've created,
on line 26, that's probably going to be something you were getting from Auth0, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I have so this is my domain, is the tenant that I created in Auth0. That's a good question. So you'll notice that whenever you create an account with Auth0, everyone's assigned a URL, and part of the sign up flow is you pick your URL, and this can be custom depending on if you own the domain or not. And custom is only is a paid feature. So the free tenants, you can't do a custom domain, but whenever you create a account with Auth0, you're going to be given a URL. So I'm passing through my tenant URL, which you can see here. And if I can find my code, it's the same here. So it's that tenant.auth0.com. And this is my client ID that I used with my authentication part. So this E9F, see if I can find it on the first try. I don't remember which one of these it is, but I think it's this one. The client ID, yep, there it is, E9F. So that one's being used for the authentication part, but that's not something we're worrying about today. And then we actually are going to update this audience, which is the identifier that we created with our API. But before we do that, let's go back to here. So our middleware, we're going to grab that guy and throw it with the protected. So now this is no longer a public endpoint. It's going to pass through this middleware, validate the access token that gets sent with it, and either send an error or respond with a message. Now to set up the client stuff, here are my two buttons. So hopefully everyone's kind of familiar with React, but it's just, I have two buttons here, ping the public endpoint and ping the protected endpoint. They're both calling functions. This one's called public endpoint, call protected endpoint. Comment that guy out. So just have a, oh, I deleted my try. Cool. So I have a try catch here where I'm going to fetch, again, just this is my Express server running API public, grab that data as a JSON, await it, and then I'm going to set some state so that you can see that message that I'm responding back with that, that I call the public endpoint. If there's any kind of error, then show that. Let's see if node mon is running. We should be able to see this working. Cool, so that worked. So for the public endpoint, right, this isn't too crazy stuff. This is just calling a simple public endpoint. It's responding back. Now to do the protected one, I'm going to just copy the same setup and then let's watch it fail the first time. So change the endpoint here to protected. And this is just sending a request, right? I'm not sending my access token yet, so I'm assuming that it's going to fail. Make sure that reloaded. Cool, so I got a 404. Oh, that might also be because, let me restart my server. All right, let's try that again. 401. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Cool. So public, right? 200 works out great, but my protected one, I'm getting a 401 unauthorized. It's telling me that it didn't find an authorization token, right? And so this is meaning this is working great, right? Like this is what I wanted. I don't want to return my endpoint unless I'm passing an access token with it. So the next question is, I know that I'm an authenticated user, right? You can see that I've authenticated and I've set this up to show the username. How do I get the access token that was generated when I logged in? And how do I send that to my server? And this is kind of where the Auth0 React SDK comes in. Auth0 has SDKs across the board for almost all languages. So if you're using Vue, Angular, even like Flutter, or just plain JavaScript, there's an SDK that helps you pull out the token that's stored within the app. And so for the React app, I'm going to find the code that's connecting with my React SDK. And there's a method on here called get access token silently. So this function will pull out my access token that's being stored within my client app, and then I can pass it along to my server. So this is just a function. So let's go protected. And within fetch, I'm going to send a authorization header. So the way that you do that with fetch is there's an optional second param of fetch, and this is where you can put your headers and stuff inside of it, or you're defining if it's a put or a post. So here I'm just going to say headers and authorization. And the way that this works is you say bearer, and then I'm going to put, I guess I need to call that function first. Okay, so I'm going to call that function, get access token silently, which is going to return my token, and I'm going to paste that token there. So now this is going to pull it out and then send it. Now this is gonna fail actually because I didn't set up the identifier, the API part, the config part that was brought up before. But I want to see, just kind of show you the token that's being added to this request. So I might have spelled that wrong, but let's look at the, if we look for that header that I set. Don't see it in here. Okay, let's refresh and try that again, I guess. Did I save it? I did save it. Protected, bearer token, okay. Oh, I am doing something wrong. Because there it is, it says it's an object promise, which is not what I want it to be. Oh, I need to await this. That's what it is. Okay, so this is a promise. That's a method coming from the SDK. Let's make sure we await that. Now let's try it. Okay. Looking for a big, oh no, did I do it again?
I think, yeah.
It's not, it does not look right.
Looks like only partial.
Yeah, I'm not getting all of it for some reason. Well, I do have my cheat sheet over here. Let's see what I'm doing wrong. Oh, this is probably because I didn't set up the, all right, let's do the part that I said. So inside the config, let's update the audience. So this is back inside of our API, the identifier that was created. So this API audience, so this URL, which is also called an identifier, this needs to be passed to the React SDK so that it creates grabs the correct access token information. And then for the React SDK, which is here, let's grab that. Okay, cool. So this Auth0 provider, this is the React SDK. I'm going to pass that audience that I've just set, which is also the identifier of the API. I'm going to pass that to the SDK. All right, third time's a charm. All right, that's what I'm looking for. So on my authorization header, I have this long gibberish, and this is our JOT, our access token. So if I grab this, if I grab all of it without bearer in front of it, I grab that and paste it into this here to decode. So this is just jot.io. It's also created by Auth0. You can put this in the chat. Oh, I've lost the chat. Oh, I don't see it. All right, well, it's pretty easy, just jot.io. You can see all the information that's coming on this payload or this jot. So it talks about the issuer, right? This is my tenant in Auth0. These are all considered claims. Right now, I haven't assigned any permissions, but this is my access token. So now what I would like to do is send this to the server. Server is going to use this and verify that it's a legit access token by using the public key, which I provided inside the server. So let me restart the server, and I'm expecting it to work now once this reloads. Okay, so now we're passing through the access token. Hopefully this works. Yep, and it does work. Awesome. So now my protected endpoint is a 200, validated the access token on the server. We can look at that again. Right, so this is the middleware. We're using those two npm packages. This is my domain to my to the public key that's on my that's within my tenant. And this middleware, you can put this on anywhere. Obviously, you can do like an app.use and apply it as a middleware to all endpoints if you'd want. or you can just put it within specific endpoints so that it only authorizes specific ones. Is there any questions on that I can try to answer? I feel like I made it a lot more complicated than it is. If you have authentication set up, just got to pull the access token using an SDK, create an API within the Auth0 dashboard, and then within Express, create a middleware that verifies the access token. And the middleware will, if it fails, it'll respond with that error message, or it'll continue on and return whatever you tell it to return. And I can't find my chat, so don't put it in chat if you have a question.
I'm monitoring the chat, and I put the URL in there for.
Great, thanks. Cool. So just a quick thing. RBAC or role-based. Put some slides together on how that would work, which is everything that I've done so far. Just right now, we're just validating that the person has an access token, so they successfully logged in. And that's it, right? We're not checking if they're an admin or if they're a developer. We're just checking to see if they have authenticated. So in order to do a role-based endpoint, right? So not only do we want them to have an access token, but that access token needs to have the correct permissions on it. So talking about roles really quickly, the way that RBAC works, you're not particularly, there are ways to get around this, but a role is basically just a roll up of permissions. So an admin might have 2 permissions, a developer might have 6 permissions. And in order to expand really well when working with authorization stuff, you want to work with permissions at an individual level. And so at a role level, you can create permissions and then assign that to users. So inside of your Auth0 dashboard, there's a user management tab, and here are the users that are with my tenant. And you can see there's a roles tab, and you can create admin, developer, whatever you want. Here I have just an admin role, and I'm going to give just the read messages permissions to it. So any of my users that I assign to be an admin, so I can assign roles to my users, admin. So this Tyler2@gmail.com is now an admin. And inside of your application, inside of your API, there are permissions here that'll correspond with the role. And settings, this is where you'll enable setting, allowing permissions to be added as a claim to your access token that gets sent, that gets provided when a user successfully authenticates. So what will happen is once you've set up roles correctly, the permissions will be added into this array here and added, which comes onto the access token. So you can check this claim here on the access token. And the way that you do that is with a third package. So the first 2, right, are just checking jots and stuff, but there's a third package. And actually, for those that are like, this is kind of a lot, we are combining everything into one. So this is a means to an ends for right now. This will eventually just be one Node Express package that will do everything. It'll check for permissions, check the jot, check the public private key signature stuff. But right now it's 3. And so this third one, Express Jot Auths, this package will check for permissions on an access token. And the code for that would be just an additional middleware. So the first one can check for an access token. The second will check for permissions on the access token. So we use that npm package that we installed in the third one, and then we pass it an array of strings of permissions we want it to check for. So in this case, I want to make sure that my user has these permissions within the permissions claim on the access token. And if it is, then I'm going to allow the resource to return. If not, I'm going to throw an error. This package does have a couple options, like you can, if you want to kind of mess with the access token, you actually can change the claim name. So if you don't want it to be permissions, you can change it to be, I don't know, roles or something specific to your app. You can you can customize what it's going to look for when it's looking for that array of strings. And then you can also make sure that if one role has one of these but not the other one, you want to make sure that it's checking all of them before you return and not just one of them. There are a couple other options on here, but these are kind of like the quicker, more important ones. But you set up the second middleware that's checking permissions that will be sent with that role. Again, the role, you define the permissions on them, right? So right now the admin role just has read messages. If my user is assigned as an admin, when the access token is created, it'll show up here within this claim. And then on my Express server, when I get that access token, I use this package, which will check and work off that access token, looking for whatever I pass it here. So in this case, I'm saying looking for read message permission and the read appointments permission. And just add that on, just like with Express, add that on to the next chain of your endpoint middleware. So this one we saw already, this was just checking the jot, and then this check permissions middleware is now verifying that this role endpoint doesn't return unless they not only have the access token, but they have the permissions I've set. And that's it. Is there any other questions? Anything people have about that?
Hey, hi, Taylor. This was a great presentation. This is Lokesh. Am I audible?
Thanks.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, quick question. I'm always confused with this audience. What does this audience mean from client perspective and server perspective, and what server perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is confusing. And another one that I'll get you is the difference between scopes and permissions, but we won't go there. But audience is basically what is a target audience of this API. So it's more of a general word. It also goes, as we saw, goes hand in hand with identifier, but it means exactly what it's trying to say. What is the intended audience of this API?
So it's going to be the React app.
No, it's going to be this API. So
okay.
The React app, it could be other applications that can work off the same API.
Think of it like this. If you are, so there's, in most of the applications, you have 3 or 4 different legal companies that are handling some of the user's data. So you have yourself, you have your, say your Facebook, which is your authorization provider. If you're using Auth0, you probably, have your Facebook key in Auth0. So people just click the Facebook button and log in, or the Google button and log in. So you have that. And then you have potentially another service, like say, Spotify or something else that you're interacting with. So the entity that creates a token for you is called the issuer. And the entity that's going to receive that token to interpret what a user is allowed to do, that's called the audience. And then you yourself are called the authorized party. So you're authorized by Google to give a token. Google issues a token, you receive the token as the authorized party, and you send the token to an audience that then does something with it. So typically in that case, the Google is your issuer, but it's also your audience, because that's where you're going to access the spreadsheet API, etc.
Yeah. Awesome.
So it's a very pedantic term, and very few people use it in the way that it's intended to be used. But I find it to be useful, especially if you're using a real URL, because then if you have, it's more useful in like a peer-to-peer system than it is most of the systems that people work with today.
Pretty good explanation. Thank you very much. And yeah, one more last thing to add. I was not more like an Express guy. I was just playing around with Node.js, and I mean, it's pretty much almost same, and I'm glad. And just to add, I'm using this Swagger where I added the document builder, and I added dot bearer token where I can directly give the Swagger endpoints are secured.
Sorry, my internet cut out there. Can you say it again?
I've been using Nest.js API where I
Okay.
have applied JWT security,
Okay.
Auth security there. I think it's Auth0 since I used client grant type, client credentials grant type. And my question is, when I used Swagger, so I also protected Swagger using dot bearer token in the document builder configuration. So my question is, in coming classes, I just wanted to know or research about role-based usage from Swagger. That would be pretty interesting.
Hmm.
Since it is introduction, yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. We do have some more articles about that. It kind of goes a lot deeper than I can do on a Zoom call. If you want to ping me on Slack, are you in the Utah.js Slack channel? I can send you some resources of how to work, and specifically with Nest too. I can also put in the chat as well. Cool. Is there any other questions? Sweet. Well, thanks for letting me speak today. Turn it back over to AJ.
So I actually want to try to pull people's questions out a little bit more, because I know like that was a ton of information to cover, and a lot of you probably don't even know enough right now to even ask an intelligent question. So if you want to just like ask what some terminology means, or try to relate something to something you're already familiar with, I know that there's a lot more that you guys have on your mind than just those one or two questions that came up, or rather, I believe that. So I just want to let silence for 30 seconds or so to, see if somebody will brave some of their stupid questions.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kritika, and I'm new to Node and Auth0. So I'm just doing my own, I'm just trying out Node and trying to do small projects. So I have a question, like if we are using Auth0, when we create users and we put it in our database, do we have to put all these tokens also in the database? Or we have to just do with the API, and then the tokens need not be stored in the database? If we are having a user table and then authenticating the user's login information and all that.
Yeah. So what's nice about Auth0 and really any identity service is all that storing and validating, all that heavy work is lifted and stored without you needing to do that. So Auth0 will handle the creation of tokens. And then as you saw today, there's packages that handle and work with decrypting and verifying those tokens. So kind of the point of it is to take as much work off of you and storing all this stuff and give you a shiny dashboard that you can work with to manage either revoking access within the user's tab, or creating new users, that kind of stuff. So that's all handled by Auth0. There are ways you can mess with that though. There are low-level things that you can do within the Auth0 dashboard in order to access that stuff. But just right off the bat, you don't need to worry about that.
Okay, so if we have to store in the database, just the login information is enough, and the tickets are not tokens and all are not needed to be stored in the database. Am I right? Just to use the API and do the authentication.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Typically, there's two pieces of information that you want to store in your database.
Okay.
One is the subject field, which is basically a unique identifier for the user that's going to persist even if they change their email address.
Okay.
And the other is likely to be the user's email address, which Tyler, you get that through calling. That's not stored in the token, but you get that through calling out to the Auth0 API. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the subject will be in the token itself, and the user's email address you'll make with another request.
Okay.
And those are the things you want to be concerned with. On the front end, there's a method that I don't remember what it's called, but it's like .token or .getToken or something like that.
Yeah, get access token.
And you're either going to get a token back that's a string, or you're going to get back a failure. And if you get a failure, you're going to call, is it .signin?
Yeah.
.open login or something like that.
Yep.
And so that's what your flow looks like on the front end, is when the user lands on the page, you call the get access token method. If that is successful, then you have the token that you send to the server. And you don't store that anywhere, because Auth0 is regenerating it somewhere between every 15 minutes and every 2 hours based on what your settings in your control panel are.
Okay.
And then and then if you get a failure, then you call the sign-in method, and that's what causes that Auth0 pop-up to come up for you to, for the user to put in a email and a password, or click on the Facebook button or whatever.
Okay. One more question. So if we have to create the tokens for the user, when suppose like we are doing it on a register page, the normal website will have a register page. And then how do you create the token for the new user? Do we have to go to the Auth0 application and create user and then get the token from there, or?
So the tokens are being created by Auth0. So Auth0 creates a token just by me simply signing in. Every time that I log in and log out, Auth0 is handling the creation of those tokens. So right now, as I log in, Auth0 has now created and stored an access token for me. I don't need to do any other work.
Okay, so whenever you log in, you will get a unique access token.
That's correct.
Okay. Cool.
And the way that I can get that out and work with it, sending it to a server, is, as you saw, it's the get access token with pop-up. Oh no, not that one. It's get access token silently.
Silently. Okay.
So this also comes from the Auth0 React SDK. So Auth0 and really any identity solutions is going to make it as easy as possible. They're gonna work on creating the tokens, storing them, giving you the public key and the private key, all that stuff, and then also SDKs or packages that allow you to pull that out from your client, and then you do something with it.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and really the access token, you won't be like messing with it specifically yourself, or in most cases at least. But the Auth0 dashboard and kind of the SaaS product of Auth0 is there are simple togins and a simple user interface that you can do by clicking buttons inside the Auth0 dashboard that will mess with the access token that gets sent down to your client. And then you've done some stuff with your access token, but it's not you manually messing with them.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Hello.
Hi,
Yeah,
David.
this is David. I have a quick question. Yeah, it is not exactly about the Auth0, but it is about the security based. So the reason why we use Auth0, it is so it is secure, and users can be used the most the security based login process. So I'm just working on a project, and it requires users to input some sensitive data like the social security number, so that we can make the transactions by a check. And so do you have any idea of the best security about keeping the user's confidential data? So
yeah, so there's a whole world of that. The idea of salting, basically making it so that when you store the passwords, that you can't pull them out again, and at least decrypt them into a string. So there's kind of a whole world behind that Auth0 and identity services do for you, as far as taking in username and passwords, salting, hashing them into a database that if it was hacked, you couldn't decrypt them out into a text-based string to work with. And so that's kind of a big part of what identity services will do when you provide that information. Is it's storing that in a way through decryption and whatnot, so that it can't be stolen and used somewhere else.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else that's been a little shy? I'm trying to coax you out.
I have a question, not necessarily directly regarding Auth0. Sorry, my name is Cecil. I think KiTsuNe is my Google login or something. But on a current project I'm working on, I haven't done too much authorization work in general. So I have authorization set up and everything. And kind of the thing I'm looking to solve right now is that, I have, the authorization provider stores a lot of the user information, but I have, app specific information that I want to also store on the user. I'm just like, how do I resolve, so things like, let's say it's like a school app and I'm assigning a teacher to a certain room. Right now my solution is I store that in my own database. I have a user table and teacher A is in room 1. And I use an external ID from the auth provider, and I store that into my my own user database. So I don't know, is there better ways of handling that, I guess? Does that make sense?
No, I'd say that makes sense. Yeah, I've seen working with Auth0, it's not a database for your app, right? It's used for the authentication part of your application. So storing your users' information, how they authenticated and whatnot is fine. And then being able to work off of your table to pull out that information to use in your app is what I would suggest. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that, but I would suggest that sounds good to me. And using Auth0 to do the authentication part, because that access token will change each time they log in and log out. So using Auth0 for the authentication part and the authorization part seems good to me.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one thing that I like to do to help secure stuff, like you saw in his examples, he had /protected. So if you want to make sure that your application is secure, and when you're dealing with stuff that has to deal with potential student information or whatever, that's probably the case, using the route, the URL path is a really good way to ensure that people only have access to the right thing. So in your example, maybe /API/teachers/rooms, and then have a parameter in the URL for the room name. And then you could check, is the person that logged in, is it a teacher? Because it's in the /teachers route. So you could have, if you were to, for example, use the permission roles that Tyler was showing, you could have a middleware that's attached to your /API/teachers route that makes sure that the token has the role of teacher on it. And then if you have your /room/room ID or whatever, that's the point where you could go look up in your database and make sure that anybody who accesses that route is listed for that room in the database as well. So that way you've got very easy to read and easy to understand layering of your security.
Yeah, so as AJ was saying, kind of a similar flow. If you have a teacher, an admin, developer, whatever it is, you can create a teacher role and create permissions for teachers specifically. And then when you assign this role to your user, whatever they are, which you don't have to do it manually, there is a management API that you can work with. But if you wanted to, you can manually assign that role to each user. So whenever they authenticate within your application, though the permissions will show up inside of their access token. And then you can work off of that claim on that access token whenever you're working with your APIs. So that was on my slide, but that gets added to the route and it'll check for those permissions.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I got a quick question. So I'm Braden. I'm just wondering when you're using a access token and a refresh token, where do you typically store those? Do you store them local memory or in a cookie?
Are you asking because you want to do it yourself, or are you asking how Auth0 does it?
Because I would want to do it myself.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that one there's a lot of people say a lot of different things, and you'll hear a lot of different ways of how that's. So I'm curious, AJ, what you've heard, but storing them in cookies is the best. And also, and Auth0 actually just recently switched to storing the access tokens in a web worker and keeping it in a thread that way. Local storage can be accessed by Chrome extensions and stuff, so it's not recommended to put it in local storage.
Okay.
So I'm going to contradict a little bit. You should not put tokens in cookies because then you open yourself up to cross-site request forgery attacks. There is exception to that, but in general, so let's consider that you have a token that's going to last 5 minutes. Let's just make it a really crazy short amount of time. That should be able to live in the memory of your application. So with Auth0, and I think the way that Auth0 does it is pretty good, or at least the way they did it last time I looked into it. You call the get access token method, and it's going to, in the background, what it's doing there is it's checking, is the token that I already have in memory, which it sounds like is being stored in a web worker now, but is the token that I have in memory, is that still a valid token just by doing a quick look at the expiration time on it? If it looks like a valid token, it's going to hand it back. If it doesn't, it's going to call a specific refresh token endpoint that is only authorized for refresh tokens, and it's not authorized for anything else, so that it's completely secure and isolated as an endpoint from the rest of the authentication layer. And so it calls that specific endpoint, and only that specific endpoint has access to the refresh token in the cookie, which is set by a path. So cookies there's a bunch of options you can put on cookies. You want to make sure that it's a secure only cookie, that it has a path to it that's directed to this specific resource that it's allowed to exchange the token, and not other resources, so that you don't have other auth middleware authorizing something that it shouldn't by mistake, especially for the cross-site request forgery type stuff. And there's another option that's new. I don't know if it's supported in all browsers yet, but it is supposed to make it's an anti cross-site request forgery. Do you remember what that's called, Tyler? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Is that same site?
I think it's same site. That might be it.
Yeah, I've been looking into that just because I've been wanting to make it work. I'm trying to make a very secure application. So
yeah, so those are the things that I would say as far as that goes. And you just hit that refresh token endpoint whenever you need to get your short-lived token. And then you do have to consider things like you have to store which device this is, because you want to be able to go in and say, okay, the user wants to say, I want to log out my iPhone. And that means that it has to invalidate that cookie. So on your token, you're going to have a property called JTI, which in other places we call a nonce. And this is basically like, that's something that you might store in your database if you're tracking it to a device, so that you can say, if I get this refresh token and the refresh token doesn't have a JTI that's in my database, then I'm going to reject the refresh token. So your access tokens, you have a lighter check on because they only last for 5 or 15 minutes. But your refresh tokens, you actually probably do want to store enough information about them where you go and hit the database and make sure that the token's still valid, because that token might last for 90 days or a year otherwise.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That answers a lot of questions.
Tyler, do you concur or do you disagree with
No,
what I said? Because
yeah, I was trying to find the article that talks a bit more about it. I did not find it, but yeah, I know that especially with refresh tokens. So there's something Auth0 came out with this year was maybe we're going down it's probably a good thing actually. So refresh token is, you know how on mobile, for those that don't know, if like you can sign in once on your phone and you're not constantly re-signing into those because that lives on your phone. And for someone to take that, they'd have to steal your phone and be able to access your password to get in. But on the web, that doesn't really work very well because we don't want someone to steal a token and have it live forever. And then they have forever access to that until someone invalidates that token. So a refresh token on the web is new to Auth0 this year, but there's a way of storing enough information about a refresh token so that when someone comes back, they don't have to constantly re-log in every 2 days or 5 days. There's enough information to check and last for only a certain amount of time, and then enough information to go and invalidate the token and come back with a new one to last, so that you're not having users constantly re-logging in all the time. It's kind of mimicking that mobile. There wasn't really a safe way of doing it, but Auth0 has come up with that this year on a way to do that within the web.
Okay, and so the refresh tokens, I'm assuming that they have to. So you have to store a certain amount of information, and then you have to store them in a separate, like a database showing that this is what refresh tokens we have saved. So
similar to just access tokens in general, you don't need to worry about saving and updating that yourself.
Okay.
Well, if he's building it himself, because you said.
Oh, if you're building it yourself, then yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like I would say, like an idea behind an access token is one of the original ideas, which I don't know how valid it is based on the way that data works in the real world, but one of the ideas was that you could have fewer hits on your database because you could have a quick pass fail on an access token. I don't view a refresh token to have those same goals. I think when a refresh token is hit, it's worth the database hit because it's not happening on every request. It's only happening every 15 minutes or every hour or whatever it is the security needs of your expiration are. And yeah, so I would say the JTI of your refresh token, you want to be storing, and you want that to be associated with a user agent in particular, because if the user agent changes, you know that something went awry. And I will say this, there's only so much that you can do in terms of security to prevent someone from being stupid. You can prevent people from making mistakes, but you can't prevent them from being an idiot. What I mean by that is, I'm just going to, this is a crude example, but this is real. Okay. This is the real world. People want porn. They want it for free. They don't want to pay. Okay. And so they download stuff that gives them a virus on their computer. The virus has a keylogger. The keylogger logs their keystrokes and can differentiate, like, okay, you just typed an email address. You probably just typed a password, and it can snatch it. So if you're dealing with maybe like an upper class type of person as your primary target user that's paying for everything, they're much less likely to get in a situation where they're looking at material that's likely to contain viruses or downloading, illegal torrents or that kind of stuff, which is where I think the majority of the viruses come from, is porn and torrents. But once a person's machine has been infected with a virus, no security measure that you take matters, because the virus has access to Chrome, it has access to their keyboard, it has access to every aspect of their computer, and there is nothing that you can do to protect them at that point. So sometimes people go, on pedantic details about, just the different methods of storage and da-da-da-da-da, but you do have to ask yourself, like, what type of user are you targeting? What behaviors are they likely to engage in? And somebody said it really well about something else in security, which was the likelihood of getting hit by a meteor that destroys the human race within the next second is something like 10 to the 45 the likelihood of having a hash collision is 10 to the 60th. So whenever you're considering your security, you have to consider what's the alternative in terms of how likely is the person to damage themselves, because you don't need to provide more protection than what would guarantee the person for the lifetime of the human or the behavior of the human. I kind of botched that, but does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, I think that the UX element is just as important, if not more important, than the technical element in terms of helping people make good choices.
Mhm.
I think this has been really good. I'm super grateful to Tyler for coming and demonstrating for us. Really appreciate that. It was awesome.
Thank you very much.